Welcome, everybody. So this entire page and this entire, reading that we're gonna have tonight is only gonna be made by me, since it's gonna be more of a one-on-one kind of thing. If you hear any background noise, I apologize. The animation quality for stream itself, I had to do some liberties and try to see if I can make it better. But yeah, I want to read Lovecraft, damn it. Yeah, but I'm not letting you because just for people to know in the future, whoever watched the VODs or anything like that, anything like Lovecraft or from those times before, people will know that there are obviously going to be some things that can't really be said online and vice versa, because, well, obviously they tended to say a lot of stuff that, can be a little bit more controversial nowadays. And so just a little heads up, I will be going around those words and, just overall, anything from these stories is to be taken lightly in a way to emphasize that at the time it was more accepted around then. As far as I can handle anything, well, that's the thing. I know most of my audience can handle it, but just saying this in the future, just so I don't end up getting myself in trouble, this is basically how I'm going to be doing this. I would show what the pages are, but honestly, it's better for me to actually just have the ability to just ensure that I can just read it without any problems. I'm reading an online public online read. Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can find a version of it for some reason, because for some reason I just can't really find a version of this book that isn't just BS, because this is why I like actual, like, hand, like, physical books. I like physical books more than I like ebooks. Sent it to you. Oh, well, shit. Actually, it's a lot more helpful. My ability to read can be a little bit more, how do I say, it's more difficult for me to figure out how to read stuff a lot than, well, I haven't read stuff in a long time. That's one of the main reasons why I started doing this. Mainly because it's gonna be more of a challenge for me, because I tend to fuck up when it comes to reading. But the more I keep reading, the better I get. It's like a process for me. That being said, yeah, just gonna put down the music a little bit more. These are finger gamer, I know. All right. So grab a drink, get cozy, let's get started. All right. All right, I'm gonna turn off my audio on my end, and we're gonna get started. All right, here we go. The Call of Cthulhu. With such great powers or beings, there may be conceivably a survival of a hugely remote period when consciousness was manifested, perhaps in shapes and forms long since withdrawn, before the tide of advancing humanity, form of which poetry and legend alone have caught a flying memory and called them gods, monsters, mythical beings of all sorts and kinds. The horror of in clay. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of human mind to correlate all of its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of a black sea of infinity. And it was not meant for we should voyage far. The sciences, each staining in its own direction, have hitherto hammered us little. But someday the piercing, together of dissociated, my bad. See what I mean? I'm gonna use this stream to make LDEX. Alright. Disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightened position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revolution or flee from the deadly night light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. Thespianists have guessed at the awesome grandeur of the cosmic eye wherein our worlds and the human race from transcend incidents. They have hinted at strange survivals in term which would freeze the blood, if not masked by a bland optimism. But it is not for them that there came the single glimpse of forbidden eons, which chills me when I think of it and maddens me when I dream of it. The glimpse, like a dreaded glimpse of truth, flashed out of an accidental piercing together of separated things. In the case of old newspaper item and the notes of a dead professor, I hope that no one else will accomplish this piecing out. Certainly, if I live, I shall never knowingly supply a link in this hideous of a chain. I think that the professor too intended to keep silent regarding the part of he knew, and that he would have destroyed his notes had not sudden death seized him. No, I'm not letting you read. This is my read. I'm sorry. The knowledge of the thing began in the winter of 1929 or 1926 through 2007. Shit, fuck. My bad. Let me read that. My knowledge of the thing began in the winter of 1926 through 2027 with the death of my granduncle, George Gamble Engel, Professor Emeritus of the Semitic Language of Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island. Professor Engel was widely known as the authority on ancient inscriptions and had frequently been resorted up to by the heads of the prominent museums, so that his passing at the age of 92 may be recalled by many. Locally, interest was intensified by the obscurity of the cause of death. The professor had been stricken with whilst returning from the Newport boat, falling suddenly, as witness said. Sorry, I keep getting distracted by chat. Such a hillside which formed a shortcut from the waterfront to the deceased home in William Street. Physicians were unable to find any visible disorder, but concluded after perplexed debate that some obscure lesion on the heart, induced by the brisk ascent of so steep a hill by so elderly a man, was responsible for the end. At the time, I saw no reason to dissent from the dictum, but laterally, I am inclined to wonder, and more than wonder, at my granduncle's heir and executor, for he died a childless widower. I was expected to go over his papers with some thoroughness, and for the purpose moved his entire set of files and boxes to my quarters in Boston. Such of the material which I correlated will be later published by the American Archaeological Society. But there was one box which I found exceedingly puzzling, and which I felt much averse from showing any other eyes. It had been locked, and I did not find the key till it occurred to me to examine the personal ring which the professor carried always in his pocket. Then, indeed, I succeeded in opening it. But when I did so, seemed only to be confronted by a greater and more closely locked barrier. For what could have been meaning of the clear clay bas relief and disjointed jottings, ramblings, and cuttings which I found? Had my uncle in his latter years become credulous of the most superficial impostures, I resolved to search out the my bad. Shut up. At the eccentric sculpture responsible for the apparent disturbance of an old man's peace of mind. I'm not going to do that. We have enough 10 as it is. Man, this is a disaster, but I do like reading this. It's fun. And no need. I kind of hate Cthulhu as a fucking being. Piece of shit squid motherfucker. Anyways. The bas relief was a rough rectangle less than an inch thick and about 5 by 6 inches in area. Obviously, of modern origin. Its designs, however, were far from modern in atmosphere and suggestion, for although the vagrancies of cubism and futurism are many and wild, they do not often reproduce that cryptid regularity which lurks in prehistoric writing. In writing of some kind, the bulk of these designs seemed certainly to be. Though my memory, despite much familiarity with the papers and collections of my uncle, failed in any way to identify the particular species or even hint at its the remotest affiliations. Above these apparent hieroglyphics was a significant figure of evidential pictorialism intent. Though its impressionistic execution forbade a very clear idea of its nature, it seemed to be short of a monster, or symbol representing a monster, of a form which only a deceased fancy could convince. If I say that my somewhat extravagant imagination yielded simulationism pictures of an octopus, a dragon, and a human caricature, I shall not be unfaithful to the spirit of the thing. A pulpy, tentacled headed, surmounted a grotesque and scaly body with rudimentary wings. But it was a general outline of the whole which made it the most shocking, frightful. Behind the figure was a vague suggestion of the Cyclopean architectural background. The writing accompanying this oddity was, aside from a stack of press cuttings and Professor Engel's most recent hand, and no pretense to literary style. What seemed to be the main document was headed "The Cthulhu Cult," in characters painstakingly printed to avoid the erroneous reading of the word of unheard of. The manuscript was divided into two sections. The first, which was headed 1925 Dream and Dream Work of H.A. Wilcox, 7 Thomas St. Providence R.I., and the second, Narrative of Inspector John R. Legrassi, 121 Bentonville Street, New Orleans, L.A. At 1908 AAS MTG. Notes on same and Professor Webb's account. The other manuscript papers were all brief notes, some of them accounts of the queer dreams of different persons, some of them citations from theoretical books and magazines, notable W. Scott Elliot's Atlantis and the Lost Lemuria, and the rest comments of long surviving secrets, societies, and hidden cults, with references to passages in such mythological and anthropological source books as Fraser's Golden Bow and Miss Murray's Witch Cult in the Western Europe. The cuttings largely alluded to outer mental illness and outbreaks of the group folly or mania in the spring of 1925. Which is a good way to have something to do for something. For example, waiting for Cyberpunk to download. That's gonna take you a while to finish. Anyways, let's continue. The first half of the principal manuscript told a very particular tale. It appears that on March 1st, 1925, a thin, dark young man, a neurotic and exceeded aspect, had called upon Professor Engel, bearing the singular clay bas-relief, which was then exceedingly damp and fresh. His card bore the name Henry Anthony Wilcox, and my uncle had recognized him as the youngest son of an excellent family, slightly known of him, who latterly had been studying the sculptures of the Rhode Island School of Design and living along at the Frio de Lis building near the institution. Wilcox was a precocious man of youth, knowing and genius, but great eccentricity, and had a childhood excited attention throughout the strange stories and the odd dreams he was to a habit of relating. He called himself physically hypersensitive, but stained folk of the ancient commercial city dismissed him as merely queer. Near mingling such as with his mind, he had dropped gradually from social visibility, and was now known only to a small group of only for a small group of aesthetes from other towns. Even a Providence art club, anxious to preserve its conversationism, had found him quite hopeless. On the occasion of visit, ran the professor's manuscript. The sculptor abruptly asked for the benefit of the host archaeological knowledge and identifying the hieroglyphics on the bas-relief. He spoke in dreamy, stilted manner, which suggested Poe's alienated sympathy, and my uncle showed some sharpness in replying. Oh, my bad, I kind of last there. For consumption freshness of the table implied kinship with anything but archaeology. but I am in 3 paragraphs ahead. Well, I'm a very slow reader. I'm sorry. Helen Wilcox rejoiced, which impressed my uncle enough to make him recall and record it in verbatim. Was of a fantastical, poetic cast, which must have been typical of his whole conversation, and which I have since found highly characteristic of him. He said, "It is new, indeed, for I made it last night in my dreams. The strange cities and dreams are older than Rudy Tyre, or the contented Sphinx, or garden-gilded Babylon." It was then that he began that rambling tale, which suddenly played upon the sleeping memories and won this fevered interest of my uncle. There had been a slight earthquake tremor the night before, the most considerable felt in New England for some years, and Wilcox's imagination had been keenly affected. Upon retiring, he had it in oh, my bad. I can't read some of this stuff. He had some of the unpredicted dream of great cyclopean cities, of titan blocks and sky-flung monoliths, all dripping with green ooze and sinister latent horror. Hieroglyphics have covered the walls and pillars, in a form of some undetermined point below had come in a voice that was not a voice, a chaotic sanction which only fancy could transmute into sound, but which he attempted to render by the almost unpronounceable jumble of letters. Horrible jumble was the key of recollection, which exceeded and disturbed Professor Engel. He questioned the sculptor with scientific minutisms and studied with the almost frantic intensity the bas relief of which the youth had found him working, chilled and clad only in the night clothes, when waking had stolen bewildering over him. My uncle blamed his old age. Wilcox afterward said for his slowness in recognition, both hieroglyphics and pictorial design. Many of his questions seemed highly out of place to his visitor, especially those in which tried to connect the latter with strange cults or societies. And Wilcox could not understand the repeated promises of silence which he was offered in exchange for an admiration of membership in some wild-spirit, mystical, or paganical religious body. When Professor Engel became convinced that the sculptor was indeed ignorant of any cult or system of cryptid lore, he besieged him. He besieged his visitor with demands on the future reports of his dreams. The board regulated fruit. For after the first interview, the manuscript records daily calls of the young man, during which he related startling fragments of non-control imaginary, those whose burden was always some terrible cyclopean vista of a dark and dripping stone with the subterranean voice of intelligence shouting monastery and in an incredible sense in packs, unescribable saves as rubbish or gibberish in some form of way. The two sounds are more frequently repeated are those rendered in the letters Cthulu Ilaha. On March 23rd, the manuscript continued. Wilcox failed to appear, and inquiries of his quarters revealed that he had been stricken with some of the most obscure sort of fever and taken down to the home of his family in Waterman Street. He had cried out in the night, arousing several other artists in the building, and had manifested since then only altercations of unconsciousness and delirium. My uncle at once telephoned the family, and from the time forward kept a close case in which, calling often at the Tyre Street office of Dr. Toby, whom he learned to be in charge. The youth's feeble mind apparently was dwelling with strange things. The doctor shuddered now then as he spoke of them. They included not only a repetition of what he had formerly dreamed, but touched wildly on a gigantic thing miles high, in which walked out or lumbered about. He had no time fully to describe this object, but occasionally frantic words was repeated by Dr. Tovey, convinced the professor that it must be identical with the nameless monstrosity he has sought to depict in his dream sculpture. Reference to this object, the doctor added, was the invariability, a prelude of the man's substance into lethargy. His temperature, oddly enough, was not greatly above normal, but the whole condition was otherwise such as suggest true fever rather than a mental disorder. On April 22nd, at about 3 p.m., every trace of Wilcox's malady suddenly ceased. He sat upright in bed, astonished to find himself at home and completely ignorant of what had happened in the dream or reality since the night of March 22nd, pronounced well by the physician. He returned to his quarters in 3 days, but to Professor Engel, he was no further assistance. All traces of strange dreaming had vanished with his recovery, and my uncle kept no records of his night thoughts after a week of pointless and irrelevant accounts of thoroughly unusual visions. Here, the first part of the manuscript ended, but reference to certain of the scattered notes gave me such a material for thought, so much, in fact, the only ingrained skepticism then forming my The Sophie account for my continued distrust of the artist. The notes in question were the descriptives of a dream, various persons covering in the same period as that in which young Wilcox had had his strange visitations. My uncle, it seems, had quickly instituted a prodigious, far-flung body of inquiries amongst nearly all the friends whom he could question without impotence, asking for nightly reports of their dreams, the dates of notable visions for some time past. The reception of the request seems to have been varied, but he must, at the very least, have received some response than any ordinary man could have handled without secrecy. The original correspondence was not prevented, but his notes formed a thorough and really significant digest. Average people in society and business, New England's traditional salt on the earth gave an almost complete negative result. Although scattered cases of uneasy but formless nocturnal impression appeared here and there, always between March 23rd and April 22nd, the period of young Wilcox's delirium. Scientific men were little more affected, although the cases of the vague description suggested fugitive glimpses of strange landscapes. And in one case mentioned a dread of something abnormal. It was from the artist and poet that permanent answer came in, and I know the panic could have been broken loose had they been able to compare notes. As it was, lacking with their original letters, the half aspect of the compiler of having asked leading questions or of having edited the correspondence in corroboration of what he had latently resolved to see. That is why I continue to feel that Wilcox somehow cognizant of the old data on which my uncle had proposed and been imposing that the veteran scientists, the responses of the aesthesist, told a disturbing tale from February 28th to April 22nd. A large portion of them had dreamed very bizarre things. The intensity of the dreams being immeasurably stronger during the period of the sculptor's delirium. Over a fourth of those who reported anything reported scenes of half sounds not unlike those Wilcox had described. And some of the dreamers confessed acute fear of the gigantic nameless thing visible towards the last. One case in which the note describes with emphasis was very sad. The subject was a widely known architect with leanings towards theosophy and occultism. When violently insane on the data of young Wilcox's seizure and expired several months later after insistent screamings to be saved of some escaped denizen of hell. Had my uncle referred to the cases by name instead of merely by number, I should have attempted some corroboration with personal investigation, but as it was, I succeeded in tracking down only a few. All of these, however, bore out the notes in full. I've often wondered if all the objects in Professor's questioning felt as puzzled as did the fraction. It is well that no exclamation shall ever reach them. Press cuttings, as I have imitated, touching on the cases of panic, mania, and eccentricity. During the given period, Professor Engel must have employed a cutting bureau, for the number of extracts was tremendous, and the source scattering throughout the globe. Here was a nocturnal suicide in London, and where a lone sleeper had leaped from the window after a shocking cry. Here likewise rambling letter to the editor of a paper in South America, where fanatic deduced a dire future from visions that he's seen. A dispatch from California described the Theophilus colony as donning white robes in mass for some glorious fulfillment, in which never arrives, whilst items from India speak guardedly of serious native unrest towards the end of March. Voodoo orgies multiply in Haiti. The Africa outpost report ominous mutterings. African officer in the Philippines find certain tribes bothersome at the time, and New York policemen are mobbed by hysterical leviathans on the night of March 22nd to the 23rd. The west of Ireland, too, is full of wild rumors and legendary, and the fanatic painter named Adonis Bonnet hangs a blasphemous dream landscape in the Paris Spring Saloon of 1928 or 1926. And so numerous are the record troubles and insane asylums that our miracle can have stopped the medical fragmentality from nothing strange parallelisms and drawing mystified conclusions. A weird bunch of cuttings, all toiled, and I can just at this date scarily evade the careless rationalism in which I have set aside. But I was convinced that the young Wilcox had known of the older matters mentioned by the professor. And that is the end of chapter 1. That will do for now. Or should I keep going, chat? Do you want me to read chapter 2? That shit sounds normal. Taking a small break. Getting some water so I don't have to end up irritating my throat. Can I read chapter 2? No. Also have fun reading Cthulu Relaya. Man, he was on some shit when he made that. Alright then, well, if that's the case, then I guess we'll have to save chapter 2 for next week. Didn't expect Call of Cthulhu to be this long. But yeah, it's a good place to close it off. Basically the narrator that really explains who he really was. Goes to see what his dead uncle basically have to deal with. It's an 8-minute read. Wait, you mean to tell me there's only 2 chapters? It's calling you. Cthulhu can go suck my dick. I don't care. Is it really just 8 chapters? Or is it just... No, is it literally just 2 chapters? That's it? Or is there more? Or am I just stupid? So far, I only seen that there's only 2 chapters. They're very long. Huh. Good luck not dying on Lockjaw trying to read them. Oh, I guess, yeah, no. Oh, no, there's 3 chapters. There's no way that this is like an 8... Like, it's literally just an 80-minute read. Ain't no way. It's 3 chapters. So, should we just stop here, or should we just keep reading the rest of the chapters? It's up to you, chat. What should we do? Drink. We hear you slurping? Yeah, I had a drink. I want my voice to get all fucked up. Your ass ain't reading the next 2 chapters. I'm reading the next 2 chapters. But I won't be reading it now, because it's already like an hour in, so... Usually these Tuesday night readings are just going to be their own independent thing, and then I'll do my own, like, a stream after this one, so, you know. 84 is an average reader? Shit, this is going to be an 8-hour stream, isn't it? No, I can read. I just don't really read that much, and my vocabulary and everything else has gone out the fucking window since high school, so that's an unfortunate thing. But you know what? Yeah, in that case, each chapter is just going to be an hour long for me, so that way I could just savor every single moment I can do, and so next week we can have more things to read. So yeah, thank you for stopping by. Dude, my family may be hillbillies, but we were also English scholars. Well, here's the thing. I also was diagnosed with like ADHD and a bunch of different shit. And I was basically illiterate for a long time in school, so my knowledge in reading is just not the best. But, you know, it is interesting that I can actually be able to read with for you guys, and you know, I appreciate you guys stopping by, even though it's a small amount of you. I still appreciate it. I'm going to continue a new stream after this one, so yeah. That being said, thank you all for stopping by, and yeah, I'll see you later.